our guest for today is Gabby Ayala, and he's had a crazy journey. He came from the Philippines and studied in the US. He worked for big tech companies like Square, Cash App in New York and San Francisco. But something compelled him to go back home, where he's now working on projects with health, Wi-Fi access, affordable electric mobility, and more. Thanks, Gabby, for joining us.
Happy to be here, Lois. Great to talk to you.
Awesome. So I think the first thing we could do is do some introductions. Like this is just like a conversation and like we can get to know each other and like talk about how you decided to go back home, what opportunities led you to do the work that you're doing right now, and how you were able to find the problems that you're currently trying to solve today.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
So a little bit about my background is I'm from Pampanga and
Best food in the
I
Philippines.
yeah. Yep. And I grew up, um, I had a very STEM background in high school. So I went to Philippine Science High School. And I learned a lot about both STEM, um, like technical stuff, and I also learned a lot about like societal issues because it was a public school.
Yeah,
And I think that motivated me to go to the US because I felt like the education here is it's very open and you can really choose what you want to do. And I felt like that wasn't available for me if I were to do college in the Philippines. And then I've been doing research about climate adaptation in developing countries and like both how you can solve the problem of like climate change
um,
with like a tech lens and like a policy lens. Um so right now I'm looking at like how typhoons and hurricanes affect communities, and I'm also like I also worked on this like app proposal to help Filipinos during typhoons so that they can find um, proper support during
yeah,
and
yeah.
after.
That's
Um,
awesome.
and yeah, that's why I was super interested in what you were doing because I feel like you're also like from what I've seen of your work, you've um, sought out these problems that people in the Philippines face, especially in like rural areas, like more underdeveloped areas, and like using, business and technology to try and solve those problems. So yeah, I wanted to learn
Yeah,
more about your background too.
yeah, definitely. I think first of all, um, it's awesome that you're doing something like this. I think part of the um, difficulty in, I think, what I find when people go abroad to college and have the opportunity to do that, and like yourself are passionate about causes back at home, but are not quite sure, is it government? Do I work for one of the conglomerates? Do I increasingly now, I think startups are something that most people see as like an actual viable career option. I don't know how our parents feel about that route still of like coming back and being a startup founder. I feel like there's a lot of the sentiment that you were able to go abroad, so why are you coming back and taking the risk to like try and do something
Yeah.
here? But putting that to aside, I think the problem I was going to say is um, there isn't that much dialogue back home around opportunities where you can still be, if we're candid, financially successful or even sort of stable and work on some of these issues that tend to be more bucketed into NGO or government causes. Whereas, like, you could probably find 100 podcasts and like 100 different institutions that talk about like impact investing and impact driven business in the US or the EU, especially the EU. So one, just kind of like having a platform, I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
With that said, I can give you the quick background and we can go wherever would be interesting for you to take it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually born in Hong Kong. My dad was with a consulting firm and he was opening offices in Asia. So at the time, I think I was born in 94. So they were, a lot of the consulting firms were going to China because that was kind of like the rising nation in the East. So he was opening offices in China. So I was born in Hong Kong,
Mm-hmm.
but moved to Manila when I was 6 years old, so 99. Uh, and when I moved, my parents had grown up in the US, and so the education system they were familiar with was a US education system. The International School of Manila is where I went basically from kindergarten through high school, traditionally the American school. So actually, I think as opposed to your experience, like great teachers, great education, but like you don't have the option to formally study Tagalog until I think like freshman year. Maybe they've changed that. Um,
Oh,
but
wow.
yeah, the languages you can take in middle school are Spanish, French, and Mandarin. So I took Mandarin actually. So my Mandarin is still bad, like terrible, but probably better than my Tagalog in terms of like my ability to converse and read.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of the exposure I got to like issues and those kinds of things were like, yeah, we would do service trips, but a lot of it was academic.
Yeah.
Um, so I actually think that's been a disadvantage for me and something that I had to learn recently since coming back. Um, and I'll talk more about why, but like I think it meant I had less of an emotional connection to a lot of the issues I'm working on now. Just because I think you form a lot of those when you're a kid and you like fall in love. Like a lot of people find passions when they're younger.
Yeah.
And I think because of that decrease or like less like, because of that decrease in exposure, um, I'm only finding some of those passions now recently, and I didn't have them kind of growing up before I went to the college. So anyway, so finished high school here, went to college abroad. I went to Claremont McKenna, which is a small liberal arts school. My graduating class is about 300 people. Um, it's part of a larger consortium of colleges. So in aggregate, it's kind of like a 5,600 person uh, uh, collection of colleges. But Claremont focused a lot on economics, finance, government. And so within the schools, we were probably the more pre-professional leaning. And I had always like loved, I went because I loved economics. My favorite
Mm-hmm.
class in was already economics. Like I think my dad being a consultant, we would talk about like business and stuff at dinner. I would read The Economist in high school, like because I genuinely like found it interesting. And so I think it was a good fit. But I think when I got to college, began developing more of a framework around what am I meant to do with life and like what does a life well lived kind of look like. I think growing up like the Philippines is almost completely Catholic in terms of like population, like 90%.
Yeah.
And so I was raised Catholic. There's always a sense of sort of service for others and like life is not about yourself kind of uh, values. And so I grew up with those, but going to college, it was like less clear to me, like, okay, does that mean I have to go and volunteer in Africa? Do I need to go back home?
Yeah.
Do I follow everyone and go and do consulting, which is what I ended up doing and anyways, because I think I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really sure what I wanted to do yet. Um, so I went into consulting. The consulting firm I worked with, actually, one of the founders is a Pinoy. So I
Oh,
met him my
really?
sophomore year. Yeah. So it's Alvarez and Marcel. Alvarez is a Pinoy guy. Marcel is a American. And they formed a company that rose to fame because when Brothers went bankrupt in the financial crisis, they took over the restructuring. And so they actually operated Lehman Brothers when it was coming out of restructuring. So I thought it was kind of interesting to be as an opportunity to kind of work specifically on like a more financially sophisticated form of consulting. So like restructuring and turnarounds, there is a lot of finance involved. My master's actually is in finance. So my undergrad's in econ, my master's in finance. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a good fit for me. I think obviously learned a lot. I lasted about 12 months. I think 6 months in after my second case, I kind of knew what I wanted to do was a little bit more like actually work with customers and have as little rationalization that what I was doing had an end impact that I cared about. So in consulting, like you're consulting for a client who then may or may not impact a consumer in a way that you like. And your hope is like your work does something either like on a second order or third order effect. And so I wanted to do something that was a lot more like, okay, I did this and this resulted in this impact on these customers, and I believe in that impact. Um, so I almost a year, exactly a year after I joined, left to go to Square, which is a company that does primarily payments acceptance for small businesses. So if you go to a farmer's market in the US and
Yeah.
they have that reader on the phone and you swipe it, that's the hardware we would make. Um, so I joined on the growth team at Square. So our objective is like for your existing base of sellers, how do you help them grow with Square? And so how do you help them discover new products? If they have complaints, how do you kind of retain them? Um, and I chose to go to Square primarily because one of the mission of the stated mission is economic empowerment, which I resonated with me. Um, and we can talk about sort of like why did I decide on that sort of like mission resonating. But I think there was also an element of like I knew again if I was going to go back home eventually, um, it's very difficult to um, it's very difficult to build like a sustainable, profitable business at scale. If you're building it in a way that like does not use technology was like my belief. And so I was kind of looking for like how do you have a business where you have a mission you believe in, but it also is extremely successful financially. Um, and Square was one of those companies. It had IPO'd a couple of years before I had joined. And so I was at Square. While I was at Square, I think that was for me and uh, where I learned a lot of sort of like how do I think about culture in work and like ways of working and those kinds of things. But I think we were in 4 countries at the time I joined. I had wanted to go to Square with an intent, explicit purpose of bringing it back to the Philippines. And after about like 2 years on the growth team, there was a international expansion team whose mandate was like to identify markets to go to.
Yeah.
So I joined that team. About a week into that team, me joining that team got completely laid off, except for me.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
the stated reason, the reason was basically like um, we in the 4 countries we had expanded into, only the US had really been successful, and so there was a sort of a question at the leadership level of should we be investing in new countries when we haven't even figured out how to expand into like one other one successfully. So that was the reason. And at the end of 2019, I think I kind of knew like, okay, I'm fairly comfortable in the US. We are helping small business owners in the US, but there's such a after even uh working on sort of like looking at different countries for Square, even like for a month or so, because prior to joining that team, obviously I already had been like working on some stuff for them. I kind of knew like if this is a need in the US, it's a way bigger need outside of the US.
Yeah.
And so I was, but I still wasn't sure exactly what I was meant to do and kind of yeah, what was I best positioned to do? So I was like looking in the end of 2019. I was looking at potentially going to like East Africa. So I visited some friends in East Africa. I was thinking about like I was of course thinking about coming home, but when I was looking at like, okay, where in the world, just from a demographic perspective, is there the most need for like this kind of product? Like Africa, of course, as a continent pops out. West Africa is probably the one that pops out the most, but in terms of where the tech scene was in Africa, it was in East Africa. So I went and stayed with friends there. And while I was there, actually, a lot of the news around COVID was coming out, and so I was basically had gone on a sabbatical from Square. This became way more than 2 minutes, but almost done. I was in East Africa when I was back from Square, so I basically had like left my job. And then when COVID hit, the administration in the Philippines, of course, was taking a lot of advice from China in terms of how to deal with the COVID situation. So we locked down pretty hard. Um, and the advice I got from like my parents, my mentors who were home was like basically if you can take your US job and also the lifestyle in the US and keep that's probably for the better. So I decided to go back to the US
Mhm.
and Cash App, which was a Hack Week project actually within Square, at that point was looking for someone to help work on their business team. So I was the second hire on what you call the business team. So up until that point, it was mainly sort of like product engineering kind of folks. We didn't have like marketing teams. We didn't have like a marketing website. We didn't
Oh,
have
wow.
the like a lot of the teams that are meant to drive growth and not product, we didn't have. And so I joined Cash App, similar kind of like reason I joined of like why did I go back versus like going somewhere else. One, I love the people I was working with, and at that point, my old boss had gone there, so I knew like there were really good people there. And two, like similar thing is like okay, Cash App, the customer base skews like lower income, and like we can see that in the data in terms of like average income of our customers, average FICO score of our customers is way lower than the US average. Like how do you
Yeah.
build tools for the consumer? So was working there in like a chief of staff type capacity. A lot of good things we could talk about, but I think moving to like 20, why did I come back in 2023? Like a year ago, I moved back. Um, I think to sum it up in a very short sentence, it was I had a feeling that I had like the random fortune to be able to be in the position and learn the things I had done. And if I didn't go back, then like who else? Like if I didn't go back, it was almost like a dereliction of responsibility to do it.
Hmm.
And I can talk about like why I felt that way. Um, and why did they decide on the Philippines versus East Africa? It was basically like in terms of where I could be best positioned personally. Like I grew up here, my family was here, we had connections here. In East Africa, I knew three people. So it was just way more believable that I could be successful in achieving the mission that I wanted to achieve here at home. So moved back a year ago, was working on a bunch of different things. And how I decided on what things to work on, we can talk about as well. But I think, as I mentioned, like not knowing exactly what the specific thing I was passionate about led me to like, let me try and discover kind of what I care about. And now, as of actually a week ago, have decided on one thing in the fintech space, which we can talk about as well. But
Oh,
now I'm working on like access to credit in the Philippines.
yeah.
Um, but a lot of the things you mentioned, electric mobility, access to internet, I think are still needs 100%. But in terms of, again, like where can I add the most value personally, given my background in finance, given my experience in fintechs, um, kind of have made a decision to focus on financial empowerment right now. So that's what I'll be doing for the next couple of years.
That's awesome. And like, I think this is a good message for people listening, just because I think a lot of people feel the pressure to know exactly what they want to do and their life's purpose
Yeah.
as soon as they get out of college. But it's not like that for a lot of people. Like you said, you didn't build that passion like fully until now, and maybe you're still trying to find it because
Yep.
you didn't have that connection to the Philippines from like a super young age.
Yeah.
Um, and I was curious about like how you did find that emotional connection, like eventually, if you have, and like I guess like why did you feel the sense of duty to do what you're doing now? Um, yeah,
Yeah.
especially because like you grew up in Hong Kong, your parents grew up in sorry, you were born in Hong Kong,
Yeah.
but like grew up in like the like international school environment, and then your parents
Very
grew up
like
in the US.
American
Yeah,
culture. Yeah, that's
yeah.
right. Um, I so I'll split that into two parts. One is how
Okay.
did I think about the kind of duty or obligation to come home, and then how did I find the passion that I wanted to work on? Like, what's a specific issue or cause
Yeah.
area, or like however you want to talk about it that I wanted to work on. Um, so the way I thought about coming back. So again, like even in college, I knew like the world that I was surrounded with was like a completely different world from where I grew up in the Philippines. Like, I mean, ISM isn't like the most wealthy part of the Philippines. Like even the
Yeah.
surrounding here is not really the Philippines. But even here, you can kind of see the difference in lifestyle that the average person here has versus in the US. Um,
Oh, for sure.
and in the US, of course, there's a spectrum of like income and those kinds of things too. But for the most part, like the social safety net is so strong that like I knew that like it was not for me. There's a bigger need outside the US, and so I knew that like the US was not the long term thing. It just like it felt kind of I felt kind of guilty about like if I was just going to stay here and just like live here, I'm kind of like ignoring all the things I had seen before.
Yeah.
Uh, but the reason the framework that I kind of think about a lot now was first introduced to me like in college. You kind of take like a lot of like your first like philosophy classes and stuff. So I was like raised Catholic, but I think the thing that resonated with me really strongly was we were actually one of my roommates in college, a guy named Clay Spence, who I think was a philosophy major. He was like, based on how you talk and like kind of how you like think about stuff, Gabby, I think you'd really resonate with this guy named John Rawls. So, American political philosopher, 1970s. I think he wrote a lot on justice and how to think about the organization of like political systems. And he has this book called The Theory of Justice, and fairly dense. I think the thing that is easy for most people to like rest to like kind of understand the argument is he has a concept called the veil of ignorance. Have you heard of this before?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So the thought experiment is basically you don't like you're an alien or like a spirit, and you're going to be born into one of the like 7 billion people on Earth. Or I think there's a layer of like you can choose like, okay, if you know you're going to be Filipino, you're going to be born as a random Filipino, like one of the 112 million Filipinos.
Yeah.
Thought experiment is like if you didn't know where in society you would be born into, or like where geographically, depending on the scope you want to think about, you would be born into, how would you want society to be organized? Like, how would you want people to act? Is basically the thought experiment. And I thought my people can have different viewpoints, and of course, like how much does your upbringing and like the reality of like I'm thinking about this as Gabby, a 31-year-old who had the upbringing I did, like how much does that shade how I answer that question? But my personal answer to that was basically if I was born into a position of uh, like privilege and I had the opportunity to like get educated, go abroad, didn't have to worry like and privilege can be monetary, it can also be like health wise, like
Hmm.
do you have to deal with like a chronic illness or anything?
Yeah.
There can like family situations. So like privilege is not just financial. There's like a bunch of
Yes,
things, but
for sure.
basically how free are you to like do things that you want to do and like what are the constraints on you? And like if you don't have a lot of those things and all you do is like go abroad and then you don't help other people, like for me, that was not the way I would want society to be organized. Like
Hmm.
those people, okay, you don't have to like completely like give everything away. Like I don't know, I didn't believe that like everyone needed to be equal, but you had more of a responsibility to like help people that didn't randomly have that privilege. And then
Yeah.
conversely, if I was into a position where like I didn't have that, I don't necessarily want you to give me things. I think there's a lot of studies on like actually a lot of people don't want charity, but I don't want to like be excluded from opportunities to be able to like do things just because I
Yeah.
don't have resources, right? Or like I don't want to like just because I'm in an island that's further away, like it's really unfair to me that if I was randomly born there, I don't have internet and you do, right?
Yeah.
And so I I think for me, one the things that made it clear, or the things that then resulted from that, were like one, I had an obligation to do things for people that didn't have the like fortune that I was randomly given. To the way I should help is by giving people access to things that I believed were things that gave me the opportunity or gave people the opportunity to like go and do things. So like there's a lot of different things that can include education, healthcare, like access to internet, like a lot of these things that like I began working on when I came home. Really the underlying metric was like how many people have access and is there a way I could create something that gives them access sustainably?
Hmm.
Um, so that was kind of like a thought experiment that I challenge like everyone to kind of go through and just like see what your conclusions are and like what does that lead you to. Um, I think it doesn't quite answer like why the Philippines specifically. I think the layer like I could go and work on these things in the again Africa or South America or like anywhere. I think the reason for the Philippines was like specifically um, one I felt in terms of where I could personally make the most impact, just given my like upbringing here, my
Yeah.
network here. The yeah, I didn't have like the biggest cultural connection here, but like do understand it a little bit more than like someone else who's coming in from abroad. Like it just like if I overlaid my obligation to like work on access and where I could be more successful, most successful, it was going to be here. So that's why I came back specifically here. And then like the different things I was working on were based on like again a more academic view of I read reports like climate actually was like one of the lenses I took and there's a book called Drawdown that like is a
Oh
very
yeah.
consulting right like Project Drawdown like they rank a bunch of things so like
Yep.
I like read through that and like there was things that popped out in terms of like things I wanted to focus on. I took like a okay, like reflecting on my own personal past, like what are things that I think I had that allowed me to do things. There's like a view of like, okay, when you think about like workforce and productivity in terms of like society, like what are the McKinsey and like consulting reports saying like you need and like internet access was a huge one, like stable healthcare is a huge one. There's a BCG study that one of our friends like had worked on that was like you go and survey a representative population in the Philippines of like I think they had like maybe 1,200 respondents, but representative in terms of like age and income and gender and those kinds of things. And they asked them like, what are your dreams? Like what do you want most? And so there was prompted, unprompted. On the prompted list, I think there were like 15 things. It included like um, better job, like be able to travel more,
Hmm.
uh, happy family. The number one thing that people wanted above everything else was like freedom from health scares. And I think it's a shade of like people like after COVID, there's like people being worried about like
Oh
their
yeah.
hospital bills. But like I like I after being back for a year, I definitely see that one all the time for like so that's been valid for me. So like okay, let's work on something in the healthcare space. Um, so that's kind of how I found it. But I think I had to do that because both a blessing and a curse. Like when I was young, I never had a health scare in our family that made me realize like, oh, the healthcare system in the Philippines is broken. Or I never had like this thing where like I wanted to go and apply for a course, but I had bad internet and so I couldn't do it. And so like if I had that emotional connection, I think that would be more clear. And I think it's super important to have that emotional connection because if you're going to actually work on something hard, it's going to be hard. And like, why are you going to keep doing it? Sure, like you could make some money at it and maybe that is some motivation. But really, it's like because you care a lot about it, it's going to be the reason why you do it, in my opinion. And so, like, you need to really care about it. So I think I've been spending time trying to find like what that thing was. And you can have, of course, multiple things, but I think that's the reason why I came back and did it in the way that I did.
Yeah. And how were you able to connect with, I guess, the people who did have those experiences? Um, like
Yeah.
where were you able to find them? Did you just like was it through an organization? Did you do like
Yeah.
community outreach?
Yeah. Good question. So when so when I knew I was kind of thinking about coming back and it was COVID, um, one of the ways that I thought about this was like I want to talk to people who are working in these spaces. And I want to support them, but I also want to have like skin in the game in terms of like, yeah, it's nice to take a call or like I can send like a check one time and donate. But I think basically like again, given my background, like I had seen the one of the things that I think is great about the way that the US works. And like, of course, like this, uh, you can debate like capitalism and those kinds of things, but like I think there is like a very strong incentive alignment around through equity as startup people, like the success of the mission of the company and your personal success and
Hmm.
like what you care about. And so like by having like ownership in that thing, you just like care way more about that than pay attention. And so basically like over COVID, like a lot of the community that had gone to school with me and like gone abroad was working in the US now. Um, they shared a similar sentiment of like wanting to like understand what was going on back home or like wanting to help back home. So um, I started like an investing syndicate where we would invest like very small amounts per person. But if you have like 20 people all investing, then you can
Yeah.
raise a meaningful amount of money. And then we would invest specifically in like sort of these like access oriented kinds of startups back in Southeast Asia, but
Mm.
specifically looking for the Philippines. So we invested in like a women's health company called Kindred. We invested in like a Robinhood like investing app called at the time it was called Stock. Now it's called Invesco. And just like by having everyone, even if it's like a small amount of money, as like an investor in that thing, now like okay, if something in the news comes up about women's health, like I care and like pay attention way more because I know I have like a vested interest in that thing. And of course, like by doing that, also like we were able to talk with the founders of those companies, and those founders like they usually have a very like deep relationship with those areas. They have like
Hmm.
the ability to kind of like share more. And so like again, like the uh uh the way that like I think I thought about like I think there was like I should be going back and like there's the obligation, but I also think like through that experience realized like how many people in my network kind of had a similar kind of like they were thinking about similar things, but we would never talk about it at dinner or anything like
Yeah.
that. And this created a space for us to talk about it. And also gave us a sort of a platform and an entryway to kind of talk about kind of the things we're talking about today, where like I'm not going to go to a dinner party and suddenly talk to someone about like John Rawls. Like it's just kind of like what's your like philosophical viewpoint on like what you should be doing with your life? It's just like a little deeper. It's a little too deep to like start the conversation
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
Oh, I have like an investing syndicate. We invested in this thing. And it's like, oh, why did we invest in that? Then you like can gradually make the space. And so like it just I thought it was like a kind of a it made me realize like how passionate I was also about like talking about this with other people as a way to
Hmm.
hopefully like just give a perspective of like, oh, it's a possible route and like here's specifically what you could do. Anyway, so like one way was doing that. And then moving back, I think it was just like meeting with a lot of people who are in the space, but also just like, yeah, like for internet going and visiting like areas that didn't have internet and just like seeing how did people access the internet? What did you want to use the internet for? Like those kinds
Hmm.
of things. Or like for the women's health clinics, going and visiting clinics and just like seeing like what were women coming in for and like what are the concerns that they had. So like again, like emotional connection, it's hard to build that by like talking with a CEO, even if they work in that space. It's hard to build that by reading a book or project drawdown. It's way like the way that I think that emotional connection gets built is like you go, you see something with your own eyes, and like you remember that story of like that person you saw. So like for internet, I still remember like the Sorry Sorry store owner with her kid who like wanted to like watch like I forget what shows like Bluey or something like that, like one of the like kind of educational kid shows.
Uh-huh.
And the like her mom was like, okay, you can watch 5 minutes, but like I don't want to pay for like the prepaid load, right? To like watch that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like again, whether that's the right content to be watching, put that aside. But like as a kid, I could do that all day. Um, and like the fact that this like kid couldn't, like that sticks with me for sure. So yeah, that's kind of how I thought about it.
Yeah. And I think the part about like just actually seeing these people and these situations with your own eyes like really leaves a lasting like impact on you and makes you feel more connected.
Yeah.
I was also curious about what you said regarding taking frameworks from like the US system and implementing it like in the Philippines. In the context of startups, since you've worked for like these, I don't know if they were startups at the time that you joined, but like tech
Yeah,
companies,
companies, yeah.
um, where do you see the like startup environment going in the Philippines? And how do you think you would like to emulate um like Silicon Valley, like
Yeah.
US tech, and what parts of it would you want to change?
Yeah. We could spend a lot of time here too.
Yeah.
Um, I'd say, of course, I think the easy answer is like you can't just like copy paste it here. There's so many
Yeah, of
nuances you have
course.
to count, right? I think, um, yeah, we can talk about like the structural challenges that make startups here more difficult than the US. Everything from political to the concentration of like essentially power that a lot of companies have here. Um, but I think what are some of the things that where do I want to see it end up? And like what are some of the things that from the US I think we could have here that would benefit? The thing that comes to mind most for sure is this thing on equity. Um, there's like tax reasons why equity also doesn't make sense, which is an issue, but I think there's also uh, one, a lack of understanding of like the value of equity. There's two, of course, the liquidity constraint that like if I'm someone who's living paycheck to paycheck and I can get this piece of paper which says like this could be worth something in the future, or I could get a little bit more money, even if like the expected value of that cash raise is way smaller, like I'll probably prefer that money because it's more certain. So
Yes.
there's like the liquidity concerns, of course, of like a lot of employees, but like the general takeaway is like a lot of people here working in startups do not get equity. And I think there's problems with that in terms of incentive alignment. I think there's problems with that in terms of like who benefits from the ownership of these companies. And so generally, I think like more distributed equity ownership and better regulation that incentive that makes it easier for people to own equity is like something that like I believe is super powerful in the US that I don't see here. I think like there's also like the lack of support systems where like, okay, I'm a really good founder who's really smart and I want to start a company. There's like to incorporate a company here is and like stay compliant with like taxes or like those kinds of things is super complicated because it's not very clear what it's meant to do. I don't have like a Y Combinator blog that I can just like copy.
Yeah.
Um, if I want to get an investment, like I don't have a template, like a safe is like a very common like template that people in startups in the US use. Like, is that legally like uh does that legally make sense here in the Philippines? Like you need to like go and like figure out all this stuff before you can even start working on the problem you need to work on. And so like I do believe in like a lot of the and support the like local players that are trying to build kind of like the YC or like support networks for founders because it's hard enough to be a founder. If you have to deal with all this overhead, it's even harder to
Yeah.
like create support systems for that. Um, and then I think the last thing is like there there's like I think a lot of the things that a lot of the reasons why the like startups in the US can be successful is there's one like so many like small startups start by selling to other startups, right? And
Yeah.
like they their first customers are like entrepreneurs who were like them, who like kind of knew what they were like, or it's like your batchmates in YC and like you go and sell to your first customer, but happens to be your friend and like next door. Um, and here there I think it'll come with time, but there aren't as many of those companies. Um,
Mhm.
and so like you're either forced to sell to like these very large conglomerates who like if you sell to them have a lot of leverage over you, or you're trying to sell to like a lot of very small mom and pop shops who may not have the budget or may not have like the risk appetite to go and try your startup to like do
Yeah.
your product. And so I think I do think that one of the things that I can do that can help a lot with the startup scene is like build a successful company that like then can like support and seed a lot of these other startups that want to come back to the region and work on stuff. Like already like being here for a year, it's so clear to me like what some of the opportunities for startups could be. And like if someone started them and I had a balance sheet or an income statement that could support like buying that thing, I would buy it in a heartbeat. Um, and so like if there's more people and more companies that are in that position like that, like it just creates like a great flywheel of like startups that are able to support themselves and at least get started. And then sure, like once you become a household name, then the mom and pop shop, it's less risky, they can take it. Or like the conglomerate can buy it, but because you have other customers, they have less leverage. So I think there's just kind of that missing middle of
Hmm.
customers that makes it a little bit difficult from what I've seen. Um, yeah.
And for people who are thinking of investing in like businesses in the Philippines, what would you tell them? Or like what reassurance would you give them despite everything you just said?
Yeah. Um, I mean, so um, from the like more like economic and finance side, like
Yeah.
great macros, like high GDP growth year over year, like 6%, like it's going to be very difficult for you to find like at the size of the
Wow.
country that we are, within with the like amount of people we have, like having 6% GDP growth is like fairly incredible. Like we have a workforce that's still like we're not at peak like productivity in terms of like working age people. We still skew very young. Um, there's like so much digital penetration and like a comfortability with adopting like new technologies. Like it does skew a lot more towards like social media. Like I think
Yeah.
like we always like celebrate the fact that like people here are like very tech literate, but I think as the more I kind of like dive in, it's like really specific to social media.
Social media. Yeah.
Putting that aside, like I think like people generally like do know how to navigate like an app and like are willing to download apps and that kind of stuff. But and so there's like a lot of reasons why I think like specifically a tech company here can work. There's I think you can invest in a lot of other causes that are not tech companies, but like what I focus on a lot and what I understand is like more like tech enabled or like tech companies. So there's a lot of those things, a lot of those things. But I'd say like the other reason to be optimistic as like an investor here is that there like even if you're not investing in like a mission oriented company, I think there's like uh, a whole debate we could have in terms of like effective altruism and those kinds of things. But I think there is like the more I've worked here, so much of what I've realized is just like a lot of the problems can be solved by someone having a stable paycheck that pays them a reasonable salary.
Yeah.
And you could be working on soap, you could be working on like again, like debate whether or not this is right or wrong in the spectrum of things, but like you could be working on like building a coal plant and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
you arguably could be doing a net good thing.
Yeah.
Um, And so like I guess like my point is like as an investor, like there's so much opportunity for you to do good by allocating capital to places that can grow and create jobs. Um, versus like in the US or like in a different country, like the allocation of capital, if you do have like if you're not investing just for financial returns, but you're investing for like some sort of impact, can be a little bit harder to like really know that it's going to have and it's going to move the needle. Whereas here, like a successful company that employs 100 people really moves the needle. Um, so I think like when I think about like investing $1 here, like yeah, there's all the macro stuff around like why this could make sense in terms of returns. But I think there's also a sense of like that dollar goes a much longer, has much bigger impact here,
Oh, it
because of the
does.
reality of like how much of a dearth of opportunities there can be.
Yeah. And about your current project about credit markets in the Philippines and um like increasing access to them, uh where are you at right now with the project?
Yeah. Um, so where am I at right now? So there, in terms of the stuff that I had been working on, Um, we so for a couple of the companies for the electric mobility one, we are starting commercial pilots. We've signed a joint venture. Like we're building a team around uh that venture. And so like there will be like the goal there is like to be the largest player in um electric mobility in the Philippines. And so we're building a team around that. If anyone's interested in that, like we are hiring. So
Yeah.
we're um, my full-time job is actually a US company that entered the Philippines that works on like access to credit. It's called Empower.
Mm-hmm.
So in the US, they provide sort of like loans to like lower income, low FICO score customers. So
Oh, wow.
there's a lot of need for that here in the Philippines too. So like the mandate I think right now is like go beyond just like credit. Like what are the
Yes.
other that customers have here that we can solve? Um, and so I think credit is a huge one though, because there's yeah, we can provide interest on savings. We could give people the ability to like make it easier for them to spend. But really, like the thing that can make a huge difference is like there's this thing that if you get it, can completely like make a stepwise change in like your productivity or your income, but you need upfront capital to do it. And no one's willing to give you that capital because they're worried about the risk of you paying it back. And so like the more and of course like there's specific things that fit in that bucket and there's like specific things that don't. Like if I go and like buy a t-shirt, that's not going to significantly make a stepwise increase in like my future life. I guess maybe you could argue it's a uniform or something, but so there's like I think credit is probably the place that matters the most, but like I think there's a lot of other needs that can be served. So that is also startup here in the Philippines. I'm hiring, and that's going to be the main focus that I have. And the goal is like let's be the largest fintech in the Philippines.
What's it
Um,
called again? Is it the same thing as the US company?
so the local entity is called Cashalo,
Okay.
but the U.S. entity that owns it is called Empower. And
Got it.
so typically the mission is like globally fair financial access. Um, so that's going to be the main thing. And then I think a lot of the other things, internet access, healthcare costs, um, uh, uh, like sort of like small business technology, like a lot of those things, like unfortunately for now, probably I won't be able to focus time on, but there
Mm-hmm.
are people who I've been working with that I'm hoping can carry the torch. And a lot of like, again, like I think there's like such a clear need for those things. Like I may not be the best positioned person to go and work on like healthcare. I have zero healthcare background. I just like academically thought it was super important and like saw so many needs that were there. But like someone who comes from a background has the emotional attachment to like internet access or one of those things, like please, like I would love to like here, just take it, like run with it. Like there's like
Yeah.
so much fun, like please take it. So like maybe in the future also like we can come back to it, like and those kinds of things. But for me right now, I think the main focus is going to be on like access to credit. And then because the electric mobility startup, we already have like a large team around it, and I can kind of take a step back and it can kind of work itself. Like that will continue to run. Um, but the hope is like a lot of these projects, like someone can continue doing it. If it's not me, then like hopefully someone with the right connections, the right skills can do it.
Yeah. Can I just say, like, I'm super excited about what you're doing. I've been learning about credit markets in my like economics classes. I'm taking this class right now about global poverty and how the lack of credit markets in some places definitely makes it harder for people to do things.
Yeah.
Um, Especially like things that could benefit them long term. Like it's either it's not available to them or they have too high interest rates.
Yeah.
So I think that what you're doing is incredible, and I hope that like you keep rolling with it.
I will say the stuff I'm doing only matters if there are things for people to invest that credit into that matter. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah, for sure.
like a solar lamp that can allow someone to like save money on kerosene and like make more money as a farmer. If we can finance that, that makes a difference. If we can finance someone's education, or we can finance like someone being able to like get a laptop so that they can work a job for a US company and make like a US salary, like those things matter. But like I think the reality of a lot of the financing right now is like it goes towards consumptive, like they're shopping on Lazada, the
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I don't want to like there is a need for those things. Like people should be happy. And like again, I had the opportunity to like buy as many shirts off Lazada as I wanted to. But the way that it really makes a difference is that
Yeah.
there are people, other people with causes, or like, yeah, access to like someone needs to put up a wind turbine. I'm just looking at the thing in the wind power thing in the background, like
This thing.
access to
Yeah.
credit, access to capital to build like a wind farm, like at a much larger like enterprise scale, like those things matter too. And it really only
Hmm.
matters if there's the other people on the other side that have the things that can increase productivity or like make a difference that's positive. And so I guess like I play a role, but I cannot be successful without other people also playing a role. And so
Yes.
like I like finding those people, or like having people come back and play those roles, like it's only possible if other people are part of the network and they ask for doing these things. So yeah, hoping that like you, or like people who listen to this also like consider being one of those people.
Yeah. And um I wanted to ask like is there anything that I know that we're almost out of time, but is there anything that you wanted to say to like me or the audience or like any advice that you want to give for people who um want to like make an impact in their careers, um especially from
Yeah,
like people from places like the Philippines, who are kind of like I guess like they want to do something but they don't know how and they might be
sure,
like scared
sure.
or
I
clueless.
think I'm older than you guys, but hopefully not too old. I'm like,
Yeah.
but I kind of remember being in folks' shoes, and I think if you are thinking about these kinds of questions, you're already like so much further ahead. Like I think there is a reality in being in elite up institutions with a lot of structure where you can compare
Yeah.
yourself to you just want to do what other people are doing. And so just like thinking from first principles, or thinking like internally, like what do I actually want to do is like the majority of the battle. And you like you have so much time. People are young. Like there's so many examples of like people who like found their true calling at like 60. Like hopefully it doesn't take that long, but like I think just like take solace and relish the fact that like you already are asking the important questions. And then I think a specific like thing I can recommend to people is um there's a specific book called Life Worth Living, which is based on a course at Yale, which is taught by like the theology school, but it's a very popular undergrad book. It's like a very short read, 300 pages, I think, 200,
Oh,
400.
wow.
But the way that it has value is actually like reading the content. It's like thinking about the questions, and especially if you have other people to like talk about it with. So I'm essentially
Hmm.
saying book club, like Life Worth Living with a couple friends, and like if you do it, like it won't take you more than like a couple weeks or a month.
Yeah.
It's like a super useful, it has some very useful frameworks to kind of think about, yeah, what should I do with life and those kinds of things. So plug for them. I don't have any affiliation. I don't think I've even met the professors, but highly recommend that book.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much, Gabby.
of course, Lois.
It
Happy
was
to
great
talk.
talking to
Hopefully
you.
we get to talk more.
Yeah. Yeah. And like just on a personal note, like I like if you're looking for people to work on those things that you're talking about, I'm like super interested.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. You're hired. Yeah, but yeah, that's I'll message you after this or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Thank you
Okay.
so
Of
much.
course. I do have to run to another meeting. I'm sorry,
Okay.
but with you. Really enjoyed it.
Bye.